Welcome back. Today, we are watching what is about to happen in Philadelphia. Vice President Kamala Harris, candidate Kamala Harris, about to walk through that door. We understand she's going to have a talk with reporters. In our business, we call it a gaggle. What does that mean? Reporters gather around. They're able to ask the person who is in the middle of the microphone, so to speak, anything they want. So as soon as Kamala Harris walks through those doors and starts to talk to reporters and take their questions, we will bring it to you live. Well, today, candidate Donald Trump heads west with events planned in Arizona and Nevada. We do have our team promising the very best campaign trail coverage right up to Election Day. CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman on Team Trump. But first, let's talk to CBS campaign reporter Nydia Cavazos. She's following Team Harris. Nydia, Harris really depending on some star power. What's her argument to voters today?
Harris's argument today is a continuation of what we've been seeing this week, is that she's trying to court all types of voters, Democrats and Republicans. And the central message here is preventing a second Trump administration. We're going to probably hear that in her gaggle today. We're still waiting on further guidance on what she's about to communicate and address. But we know that Harris is focusing on courting undecided voters, courting those swing voters, and really courting those Republican voters who may not necessarily be sold on the idea of Trump just yet. And so on one hand, we'll be hearing that. And then on the other hand, we're also going to see her continuing court her base and making sure that they're mobilized, that they're energetic and enthusiastic enough so that they're going to turn out. And this is why we have Willie Nelson, Beyonce, for example, that are going to be appearing along her side in Houston.
So, Nydia, VP Harris really had some blistering words for Donald Trump yesterday. I want you to stay with us because I want to ask you about something she had to say. But for our viewers, watch this.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I also believe that the people who know him best on this subject should be trusted.
All right, so you heard her answer there. The question that was asked, do you believe Donald Trump is a fascist? We just want to button that down, and that's what the question was. So, Nydia, Democrats and the Harris campaign are really focusing in on these comments. They're also talking about the comments of John Kelly in that Atlantic article. How are they going to use these in the days to come to really boost Harris's argument that she has the level head to become the president of the United States?
We really are seeing Harris here amplifying her anti-Trump messaging, which is why we've been hearing from her consistently this week on Kelly. And her main argument here to American voters is not to listen to what she has to say about Donald Trump, but rather hear it from the people who directly worked with Trump and listen to what they have to say and the flags and the warnings that they're raising against him. And all of this is part of her message to try to court voters and try to convince them that, the United States democracy is at risk with the second Trump presidency. And so this is a continuation of the message that we've been seeing on the campaign trail this week for Harris.
Messages and also themes, and I think things that we're going to see in the history books in the years to come, and that is Republicans stepping forward to back a Democrat for president and the many reasons they say why. Today, another noticeable endorsement for VP Harris, this time former GOP Congressman Fred Upton. He's the one, viewers, who, by the way, voted to impeach Trump. So how do these endorsements really land with undecided voters?
This is exactly why they've also been amplifying Kelly's message in efforts to help court other Republicans and Republicans who have also been working directly with former President Donald Trump. And this is to convince voters of what a second Trump administration would look like. And we've seen on the trail that Harris has been campaigning with Republicans, with former GOP Representative Liz Cheney, for example. And again, this is part of the strategy here as they continue to campaign across battleground states, but specifically in counties that, for example, had a strong share of Nikki Haley voters. Are trying to court these voters in, and so more Republicans coming on board with her is helping her case here.
Well, we're also seeing Donald Trump respond by bringing in a former Democrat on stage with him. We're going to talk about that just a little bit later. All right, so let's talk about President Donald Trump headed to Arizona and Las Vegas. Vivek Ramaswamy and the person I was just mentioning, Tulsi Gabbard, joining him on the stage. Out of the 7 battleground states, Nevada represents one of Trump's best chances to expand that electoral map, to empower his push for the presidency. So let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman. Katrina, I lived in Las Vegas. I lived in that battleground state for more than a decade. I know that state has not traditionally sent Republicans to office. What's the change in the game there?
Trump's messaging really seems to be resonating in Nevada, Reed. One thing that he's been really pushing for this cycle is for people to vote early, and some numbers came out yesterday that showed that 20,000 more registered Republicans had cast their vote than Democrats, which I think is unheard of in the state. A lot of his messaging has been geared towards the economy, which is really hitting home in Nevada, where the unemployment rate is high. He's proposed policies that would help workers, such as no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. There's also a lot of issues with housing prices in Nevada. Trump has proposed opening up federal land, which could also be very big. And he really just seems to be making an impact with Latino and African-American voters who are going to be very crucial in this race.
So let's talk about those John Kelly comments about his former boss, Donald Trump. Certainly sparking a lot of comments from Harris on the campaign trail. Any reaction from Donald Trump?
Trump has posted on Truth Social. He called John Kelly a liar. He says that he was a bad general. He's really denying these stories and defaming Kelly in a lot of ways. He says that he no longer wanted Kelly's advice when he was in office and told him to move on. Kelly is a four-star general who worked very closely with Trump and is now making these claims that he thinks that Trump meets the definition of a fascist, that Trump thinks that Hitler did good things, and that he perceives that Trump values loyalty to himself over loyalty to the Constitution.
Well, Democrat vice presidential nominee Tim Walz, while casting his early vote ballot yesterday, asked all of us to read that Atlantic article and for voters and viewers to decide for themselves. Katrina, thank you so much for that. All right, so let's go to the Middle East now and the race to keep a lid on a very hot situation. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken continuing his push to bring an end to the war between Israel and Hamas to get the hostages released. Earlier today, he also announced $135 million of humanitarian aid to Gaza during a conference in Qatar. Listen.
We all know that it's not enough to provide funding. It's not even enough to get the assistance to the borders of Gaza. What's so critical is that the aid gets to the people who need it. Secretary Austin and I emphasized in a letter that we wrote recently to our counterparts in Israel the imperative of Israel taking urgent and sustained action to make sure aid can get to those who need it.
He's, of course, talking about that letter that they thought was just going to be a private diplomatic letter between the United States and Israel that ended up becoming public document. That letter urging Israel to get humanitarian aid past those borders Blinken is talking about, and actually to the people who need it so badly. He's now on his way to London to meet with a number of leaders from the Middle East. We are there. We'll continue watching it. Meanwhile, he's getting briefed on this situation. In Gaza, at least 17 people killed in an Israeli airstrike, reportedly on a school that was being used as a shelter. That number includes at least 5 children and 2 women. So far, Israel has not commented on the reasons for that strike. Lebanon also reeling from Israeli airstrikes. In fact, a video to our monitors showing destruction left behind from the barrage of missiles that hit Beirut's southern suburbs overnight. Lebanon's state news agency calling this the most violent attack they've seen since the war began. CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio brings us that and more on Blinken's trip throughout the Middle East.
Blinken and Qatar's prime minister said that negotiators will meet Israel's team for hostage and ceasefire talks. Blinken also said he anticipates that negotiators will be getting together in the coming days. He said they haven't determined whether Hamas is prepared to engage or not, but the next step is at least to get negotiators together. Also out of the prime minister's office here in Israel, the news is that they are dispatching the head of the Mossad, David Barnea, to Doha this Sunday. And in another development, Qatar's premier said that they have actually recently re-engaged with Hamas after Yahya Sinwar was killed early this month. What we are still waiting to learn, though, is who now speaks for Hamas in this post-Sinwar age. It would not be unexpected, though, if Blinken talked with the Qataris about who they thought would lead Hamas now and how the U.S. and other countries might then deal with that person, whether it's someone who's more of a hardline figure or someone who might actually want to cut some kind of ceasefire deal. Tomorrow, Blinken is expected to be wheels up from the region and wrapping up his 11th trip here ever since October 7th. Meanwhile, Israel's two-front offensive carries on in Lebanon. It was one of the worst nights of strikes so far for Beirut. Lebanon's health ministry said that the IDF carried out nearly 20 attacks on the capital's southern suburbs overnight. This was without warning, they said, and that it leveled several buildings. And Lebanon's military said that an IDF strike killed 3 of its own soldiers who had been evacuating a town in southern Lebanon. Those deaths happened, though, as France was hosting a conference specifically to support Lebanon's military. And it is seen as so crucial to peace here because it's been pretty much powerless in Hezbollah strongholds. Also, south in Gaza, the IDF appears to be tightening its siege of the north, and with a focus still very much on Jabalia. The health ministry run by Hamas said that at least 42 people died in Israeli strikes. The army's been on this offensive for nearly 3 weeks now. They say it's to stop Hamas from regrouping, and this has all just intensified since the IDF killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar last week. Read.
Remy Inocencio reporting from Tel Aviv. Hey, when we come back, 2 men convicted for chasing down and murdering Ahmaud Arbery. They want a judge to give them a new trial. Their arguments and the days the judge has given them to state their case when we come back. Happening soon in Los Angeles, District Attorney George Gascon, who's up for re-election, by the way, is scheduled to hold a news conference in about 3 hours to announce his decision on a possible recommendation of resentencing Eric and Lyall Menendez, that highly publicized case gripping the nation for decades, and most recently with a documentary and a Netflix series. Menendez brothers currently serving 2 consecutive life prison terms without parole. So CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins us to break this down. Jessica, we kind of thought this would happen by the end of the week. It's Thursday. We may have a decision. The argument is that evidence in that retrial, the first retrial, was not allowed in, and that really made it so that the guys couldn't get a manslaughter conviction, which would have meant they'd get out earlier. Could we actually see a manslaughter sentencing happen and the brothers walking free?
Not today. So we could see the district attorney who is up for re-election, and we will be voting, if we haven't already, in less than 2 weeks. We could see him say, I am going to recommend resentencing. Read, for the reasons that you just talked about, because there's evidence that wasn't presented at trial and some new evidence that might have changed the jury's verdict, at least for Jose. Maybe not for Kitty, where I think the first-degree murder conviction, frankly, still would stand, but at least for Jose, that would have been brought down to manslaughter. But then a judge has to bless that. So there's a real question of timing here. And the reason I brought up the election is because we now, not just when it comes to the national level, but also here in this local race, have an overlay of legal decisions and the electoral calendar as well.
All right, so recommend could happen today if that happens, but it's not just necessarily a golden key that unlocks the prison gate, so to speak. So give us some scenarios. What if the brothers are granted this motion? What's next?
Exactly. So the press conference is not the filing of the motion. So assuming that the motion is ready to go, it's filed in court. At that point, the judge is going to spend some time to look at the evidence. And while there's always more complexity here, the basic roots are a judge says to the district attorney, I agree with you, and there is a resentencing. And at that point, you could see that the brothers are allowed to say, time served. You've already given back. You've already been punished. You could also see a judge say, I'm not with you, I think, and then there's a variety of different scenarios. It could be, I agree with the consecutive life in prison sentences, or I think something somewhere in the middle would be more appropriate.
So talk to me about the timeline of this, and you do mention the re-election and what's going on there. Could this conversation be going on past the election? What do you see by way of a timeline?
So what we're looking at here is it's interesting because the DA had to respond within about a month by the end of November. He's decided now to respond earlier. And the question, I think, really in terms of whether or not the district attorney's suggestion could be binding is whether or not a judge would say yes or no before we might have elected a new DA. Now, in the polls in Los Angeles, and I don't expect everybody to track this constantly, but George Gascon, the current DA, is significantly behind. So what we need to look for is whether or not a judge schedules a hearing and makes a decision before potentially Nathan Hochman, who at this point is very ahead in the polls, would be able to make his own suggestion to the judge. Once the judge says thumbs up or thumbs down, that would be binding. It would be very hard for, if there's a changeover in the DA's office, for that to be undone. In terms of timing, it's really up to a judge to decide when these hearing dates would be set and how quickly they want to look at the evidence.
I got a term for you. It's called YouTube rabbit hole. I have gone down that rabbit hole many a night looking at so many things, not the least of which Gascon saying in recent days that he thinks that the Menendez brothers should have been sentenced to manslaughter. That is a little bit of a hint of what could come. But it's so great to talk to you to understand the process here and that this is not necessarily a slam dunk, no matter what we hear today about 1:30 Pacific time. Jessica, thank you so much. Always a pleasure talking to you. Let's go to Georgia now, where the three men serving life sentences in prison for chasing down and murdering Ahmaud Arbery in 2020 want a judge to grant them a new trial. That judge is taking 2 days to listen to those arguments. Let's bring in CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez. Manuel, what arguments are being made, and what are they in relation to where that original case is concerned?
Right. Well, these are the attorneys for the three men who were found guilty of murder of killing Ahmaud Arbery back in 2020. The attorney for one of the men is saying that there was a tainted jury that was quote unquote, had outside influences, according to this one attorney. He talked about an interview that one of the jurors gave a private investigator, in which he said something to the effect of, "I felt sorry for the family and justice has to be done." So this defense attorney is telling the judge that he believes that that person concealed that he had bias in favor of the Arbery family. So that is the argument being made in court right now, trying to get a new trial for the three men who were found guilty of murdering Ahmaud Arbery.
So we know what the judge's actions are, but any sign of what the judge's response is in any other way to that request?
In the questioning of the attorney who brought up this juror concern, the judge seemed skeptical at this point that it would rise to the level of a potential juror misrepresenting themselves when it comes to the jury selection process, which, of course, in legal terms is called voir dire. So the judge at this point is not making a final ruling, but just the questioning seemed to indicate he didn't think that that was going to be enough. That being said, today is the first of 2 days of hearings about this particular situation. No idea at this point whether the judge will rule from the bench or will take his time to make a ruling.
All right, Manuel Bojorquez, thank you so much for that live report. Another high-profile court case has us jumping the map to San Francisco, California, and that murder case that has a tech consultant accused of stabbing to death a tech executive. That is the focus there on the West Coast. Nima Momeni is his name. He's accused in the murder of Bob Lee. Momeni's sister, Kawsar Momeni, on the stand again today, testifying that she received intimidating messages from Bob Lee's ex-wife. You see her there in the courthouse, Krista Lee, in the days after the murder. So prosecutors showed the jury that exchange between Krista Lee and a friend that reads, quote, "Do you want to play detective?" That text was forwarded to Momeni's sister. Now the two women share a courtroom where things got very heated. They won't be sharing it anymore. The judge barred Lee after she reportedly stormed out of the courtroom in a profanity-laced display. Testimony continues today. We'll be watching closely. A new report from the United Nations looks at progress over the last year to tackle climate change. The short answer here, we, according to that report, as a planet are way off target. In fact, that report used the word catastrophic. Climate scientists compared current greenhouse emissions to the target rates required to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement, and there's a lot of progress to be made yet. CBS News national environmental correspondent David Schechter reports the UN is now calling for global and immediate action.
So the headline from the United Nations is that it is still, quote, technically possible for the world to reach its target of 1.5 degrees of warming. But in reality, it's clear from this report that the world and the countries of the world are very far off, probably more on target for 3 degrees of warming. Every country in the world has made contributions or made sort of a dedication to say we will reduce our emissions by this much. And what the UN is saying is that the words are good, but the actions are not really meeting where the countries should be right now in reducing their emissions. And so In a little bit later in November, the countries of the world will gather in Azerbaijan, and there will be a lot of pressure there for countries to match their words and their actions to reduce emissions basically by 50% by 2030. And to do that is a major effort with solar and wind and reforestation efforts. So there is a lot for the world to do. But this report is concerning that we are really not where we need to be. The next target from 1.5 would be to stay at 2 degrees of warming, but even that is a challenging number. And really what the UN is saying is it's go time. The world has to really move here. And with the election coming, it's very important decision for voters between the two candidates who have a very different view of what climate change is and how to tackle it or not at all. Back to you guys.
All right, David, thank you. And Jessica joins me now. It's fascinating, Jessica. When I was in school, you never heard the words climate change. Now kids coming up, this next generation, they hear about it all the time.
It's not hard, especially if you live in the South right now when you're seeing daytime highs 22 degrees above average, to ask the question at least why, right? That's what gets you curious. That's what makes you want to know more. And as you start to dive into climatology, you start to realize there's patterns. And I want to show you what's happening right now. As we head all the way down into the South, daytime highs today anywhere from Dallas all the way over into Tulsa, El Paso, and of course Wichita. We're all breaking records today with extreme heat, sitting in the 90s right now, where usually this time of year we're about 20 degrees cooler than that. So I'm going to remove this, and I want to show you as we head into the next 6 to 10 days, this heat's still going to stick around for us in areas like Atlanta, all the way over into Louisiana and Mississippi too. We are dealing with above average conditions today by about 6 to 20 degrees all throughout this region. You see that in New Orleans, you see that all the way up into Kansas City, 22 degrees above average this afternoon in Kansas City. And we continue to track that closely as we head into the coming days. That heat's going to stick around for us as we head into the evening hours tonight, early morning hours tomorrow, lasting into this weekend and early next week as that area of high pressure sits directly over the south. Now, mind you, this is the exact same system that brought in record-breaking heat all the way up into New York and Philadelphia earlier this week. It's slowly starting to creep to the south, and it'll continue to impact millions of Americans with hot conditions as we head into this fall week. So we continue to monitor that closely. And looking at the Climate Prediction Center throughout the next 6 to 10 days, areas like the south, stretching all the way up into the northeast, are expected to deal with warmer than normal conditions. You head all the way over into the west coast. On the contrary, cool conditions are lasting in areas like Las Vegas, over into San Francisco and Los Angeles, despite the fact that it's still relatively dry down there. But yeah, that's the big talk right now. We talk about climate change, we talk about above average conditions. You look at the models, and when you see long stretches of period where that heat sticks around, it gets you to start asking the question why. Because
of people like you, scientists everywhere, we now have the data. The data can be studied and the case can be made. Jess, thank you. Hey, when we come back, a no-go at Boeing. The strike will go on. That's your headline. We're going to be talking about the cost of jobs and the economy. Straight ahead. All right, admitted space geek here. You want to nerd out with me? You got to watch this. This is moments ago. SpaceX launched its Falcon 9 booster from California. Listen into this test of the capsule's capabilities.
Watch. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
All right, one hot tail there, and I told you, pretty cool there. Now we're going to show you something really cool. This happened just a moment ago. Also, that very same rocket right there in the Pacific Ocean. Now it's going back down again, and watch. It's not going to land in the water. It's going to land on a contraption there, just waiting to bring it on home. How's that from two perspectives? By the way, that mechanism that welcomed the rocket back home to the water, floating out there, it's got a name.
Falcon 9 has touched down.
Of course, I still love you.
I still love you. This
pretty fascinating. Okay, so let's go from that flight to word of hopes for another flight. But so far, things are not getting off the ground here. Big news out of the world of big business. The strike will go on. for Boeing machinists. Those workers you see there voted to reject the latest contract proposal made by Boeing. So what does it mean? That means this historic strike goes into 6 weeks now. So let's talk live with CBS News senior transportation official and correspondent Chris Van Cleave. Chris, Boeing is really bleeding money here. What's the impact to Boeing and the economy and workers?
Well, Boeing reported a dismal third quarter, losses around $6 billion for the third quarter. Analysts put the cost to Boeing with this strike going through at least this week closer to $8 billion. You're seeing suppliers now like Spirit AeroSystems that builds fuselages for several Boeing airplanes. They're going to start furloughing employees, and they say if the strike continues through November, they'll be forced to consider either more furloughs or layoffs. That's rippling through the Boeing supply chain. There are about 2 million components in a 737, so a lot of suppliers and a lot of jobs that hang out there are hanging in the balance there. You also have the strikers who haven't received a paycheck in 42 days and counting. They lost their health benefits at the beginning of the month. That is, I think, part of why you saw the vote go from 95% of people rejecting the original contract offer to 64% of people rejecting this recent one. You have a group here that wanted to get back to work, that the offer was good enough. And then sort of long-term effects, you have all of these airplanes that aren't being built, that aren't being delivered. You drive around the Renton facility where we are here, where they build the 737, and there are lines of mostly completed 737s that maybe need paint or need some flight testing that would otherwise probably have been delivered to airlines by now. All of those delays add up, and that means that United or Southwest have to keep planes in service longer than they wanted to, and that's more expensive for them. They require more maintenance as they age. It also means they may not be able to launch new service the way they had intended. A flyer may not see that right away, but certainly it is rippling through the supply chain and through the aviation world the longer this goes.
Chris Van Cleave live in Renton, Washington. Thank you for that. Let's go from Renton right now to Philadelphia, where Vice President and candidate Kamala Harris speaking to reporters. Let's go ahead and listen in.
Well, let me start by saying I'm really very proud to announce that we've had some endorsements this morning as we've been rolling out endorsements, but 2 leaders in the Republican Party, the mayor of Waukesha, and then, of course, former Representative Fred Upton. And this continues to be, I think, evidence of the fact that people who have been leaders in our country, regardless of their political party, understand what's at stake. And they are weighing in courageously, in many cases, in support of what we need to have, which is a president of the United States who understands the obligation to uphold the Constitution of the United States and our democracy. As for last night, yet again, Trump not showing up, refused to be a part of a CNN debate, and clearly his staff has been saying he's exhausted, and the sad part about that is he's trying to be president of the United States, probably the toughest job in the world, and he's exhausted. I said last night what I mean, which is the American people are being presented with a very serious decision. And it includes what we must understand will happen starting on January 20th in this choice. Either you have the choice of a Donald Trump who will sit in the Oval Office, stewing, plotting revenge, retribution, writing out his enemies list, or what I will be doing, which is responding to folks like the folks last night with a to-do list, understanding the need to work on lifting up the American people, whether it be through the issue of grocery prices and bringing them down, or investing in our economy, investing in our small businesses, investing in our families. Happy to take any questions.
Madam Vice President, you will be back in Philadelphia with members of your team on Monday, former President Barack Obama, as well as Bruce Springsteen.
Yes.
Can you tell us where that may be? And secondly, any other, as we would say, heavy hitters in your campaign planning to come to Philadelphia in the lead up to Election Day?
Well, I'm very honored to have the support of former President Obama. As you know, he's been on the campaign trail and has been really wonderful and extraordinary in terms of the time and effort that he's putting into our campaign. And people like Bruce Springsteen to have their support, and of course he is an American icon. I think it just shows the breadth and depth of the support that we have, and also the enthusiasm that a lot of people are bringing to the campaign and feel about our campaign.
Any other big names we can expect?
I have nothing to report at this moment. Stay tuned, however.
Vice President, what do you make of the gender gap in this election? Why do you think you have stronger support among women than the former president?
Well, I have to be honest with you. It's not what I see in terms of my rallies, in terms of the interactions I'm having with people in communities and on the ground. What I'm seeing is, in equal measure, men and women talking about their concerns about the future of our democracy, talking about the fact that they want a president who leads with optimism and takes on the challenges that we face, whether it be grocery prices or investing in small businesses or home ownership. So I'm not actually seeing that kind of disparity, and I intend to be a president for all Americans. And that includes paying attention, yes, to a fundamental freedom that has been taken away because of Donald Trump, the freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body, and in equal measure to prioritize the economic needs of individuals and families in America, and what we also must do in terms of upholding our strength and standing on the global stage.
Madam Vice President.
Y'all sort that out.
How are you going to vote on Prop 36 in California? You are a California voter. Do California and other states need to punish drug and theft crimes more harshly?
So I have not yet voted, and I have not yet had the chance to read through the ballot. I will keep you posted on that.
We have time for one more question. Madam Vice President, this topic was brought up last night, but will construction of a southern border wall continue in your administration?
I will tell you that my highest priority is to put the resources into ensuring that our border is secure, which is why I've been very clear. I'm going to bring back up, as president, that bipartisan border security bill and make sure that it is brought to my desk so I can sign it into law. The biggest issue that we have right now is that Donald Trump has stood in the way of what would have been a proven part of the solution to the bigger problem, which is that we have a broken immigration system in America and we need to fix it. And we have the tools at hand, but we have on the other side of this election Donald Trump, who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. I intend to fix the problem in a way that is just about practical solutions that are within our arm's reach if we have the commitment to do it.
Vice President Kamala Harris, candidate Kamala Harris, taking the questions of reporters. She started out what we call a gaggle with reporters in our business, talking about more Republican endorsements for her. By the way, Vice President Kamala Harris says if she's elected and made president of the United States, she will appoint a Republican to her cabinet. Much more to come from the campaign trail. Something that a lot of people are watching who want the keys to the White House is the situation in the Middle East. Well, one day after a terror attack in Turkey, bombs fly. Who's launching them? Who got hit and why when we come back? So this video to our monitors out of Turkey showing that country in real time fighting back in response to that deadly terror attack at an aerospace business that we first showed you yesterday. This new video you're looking at right here shows Turkish airstrikes hitting Kurdish militant targets. These targets are in Iraq and Syria. So we're also hearing what the damage is on the ground. Syria says the strikes killed at least 12 people, including 2 children. The Turkish government blames yesterday's attack on the Kurdish militants that they hit. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tayyab reports that those militants set off explosives, opened fire, killed 5 and wounded more than 20 others.
Turkey has launched a series of airstrikes against suspected Kurdish militant targets in Syria and Iraq after blaming the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, for a deadly attack on the headquarters of the Turkish National Aerospace Company on Wednesday that killed 5 people. Now, Turkey's national intelligence organization said it had targeted numerous, quote, strategic locations used by the PKK. There was no immediate statement from the PKK on the attack or the Turkish airstrikes, which reportedly targeted military intelligence intelligence, energy, and infrastructure facilities, as well as ammunition depots. According to a Turkish security official, armed drones were used in the strikes that reportedly killed at least 12 people. Now, yesterday, Wednesday, 2 attackers, a man and a woman, killed 5 people, as we've been saying, and wounded around 22 others in what Ankara has called a terrorist attack. Now, armed with assault rifles, the pair set off explosives and then opened fire. Security teams were dispatched as soon as the attack started at around 3:30 p.m. local time. The 2 assailants were later killed, and as we've been saying, more than 20 people were injured in that attack, which occurred just a day after the head of a far-right nationalist party allied to the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, raised the possibility that the PKK's imprisoned leader could be granted parole if he renounced violence and disbanded his organization. Now, Abdullah Öcalan's PKK has been fighting for autonomy in southeast Turkey in a conflict that has killed tens of thousands of people since the 1980s. The PKK is considered a terrorist group by Turkey and its Western allies, a characterization the PKK denies.
Coming home to the United States, and you can see it here on the monitors behind me, countdown to Election Day. Today's focus for candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, key Sunbelt voters. So it's the former president versus the vice president. Donald Trump is in Arizona and in Las Vegas. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris headed to Georgia. Both candidates sharing the stage with some pretty big names. Donald Trump with Vivek Ramaswamy and Tulsi Gabbard. Kamala Harris with Barack Obama, Bruce Springsteen, Beyonce, and Tyler Perry. So with candidate Donald Trump in Arizona today, immigration and border issues continue being a hot topic and a narrative. So CBS News' Omar Villafranca is on day 5 of his storytelling trip across the southern border towns, talking to people who live there, right there in Arizona. Right there, he spoke with county sheriffs and visited a local port of entry to get firsthand accounts of what it's like to live in these border towns.
Day 5 of our border towns journey. We started in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. 1,550 miles later, we are in Yuma, Arizona. Now, what makes Arizona interesting when it comes to their border communities, yes, they do have migrant surges, but this is absolutely one of the biggest hotspots for drug trafficking. Now, according to the Customs and Border Patrol data that we've seen, more than half of the fentanyl that has been seized trying to come into the U.S., 66%, passes through the Tucson sector, which is all the ports of entry in Arizona. We're talking almost 12,000 pounds has been seized in fiscal year 2024. That is a big deal. This is also the place where, while we did talk to some communities who say they feel safe, over in Cochise County, we talked to the sheriff, Mark Daniels, and he told us up front he feels like his community is not safe because of the criminal element that's coming in. He says that they have what are called runaways, and these are people who are continuing the drug smuggling on the U.S. side, and they're trying to catch them. So there's a lot of chases in his county, sometimes with deadly consequences. An interesting point that he drove home is that most of the people that they are arresting and catching that are runaways, that are trying to be drug mules and move it across the country, are American citizens who are involved in this drug trade. He said no matter what happens in the election, no matter who wins, that person needs to work with Congress to do something about border security and the immigration laws for their border towns. Our journey is going to continue to California later on today, and we will speak to people in border towns to find out what life is like in their communities. Omar Villafranca, CBS News, Yuma, Arizona.
We're going to take a little break, but when we come back, we're going to keep the narrative on Arizona. Somebody has been caught and cuffed for reportedly shooting at Democratic Party headquarters. Some of that office is used by Vice President and candidate Kamala Harris. More when we come back. Let's go to Tempe, Arizona. Police arrested a man accused of shooting at a Democratic Party campaign office. Jared Hill reports when authorities got him, the 60-year-old suspect had a huge arsenal of guns and ammunition inside his home.
Justice does not have a political party. There is no place in the city of Tempe for political threats or intimidation.
On Tuesday afternoon, police surrounded Jeffrey Michael Kelly's car during a traffic stop before hauling him away in handcuffs. He was arrested on terrorism charges in connection with a string of shootings at a Democratic Party campaign office. Officials say the 3 shootings started back in September and all happened around midnight. During one incident, Kelly allegedly fired BB pellets and then gunshots at the glass front door and a window. At a news conference, police said that after 5 weeks of investigation, it was tips by people in Kelly's neighborhood that led police to him. During his first court appearance Wednesday morning, prosecutors told the court that back in July, Kelly did a Google search for the DNC office's address, and officials said that during a search at his home, they found more than 120 guns, over 250,000 rounds of ammunition, and .22 caliber casings in his trash can, along with scopes, silencers, a grenade launcher, and body armor. Officials say Kelly was seen hanging suspicious bags containing a white powdery substance from several political signs, lined with razor blades just a day before his arrest. They say at least one of those bags was found to just contain baking powder. Kelly was released on bail and ordered under house arrest. His attorney says Kelly is a retired aerospace engineer with no prior record and legally owned his firearms. Following their discovery, officials say they believe Kelly was planning a much bigger mass casualty. Jared Hill, CBS News.
Let's go to Georgia. A near miss with a cyber attack on the Secretary of State's office. The target, the absentee voting website. Now, there's good news to report here. Officials say they thwarted that attempt. So here's the backstory. People inside that agency started to notice a spike in worldwide access attempts to that site 9 days ago, causing it to crash. Authorities believe the attempt may have ties to a foreign nation. They are investigating at the highest levels. Also in Georgia, 3 men serving life in prison sentences for chasing and murdering Ahmaud Arbery in 2020 want a judge there to grant them a new trial. So a judge set aside 2 days to listen to their legal motions. They're arguing allegations ranging from a tainted jury to ineffective counsel. In February of 2020, Greg McMichael, his son Travis, and their former neighbor William Roddy Bryan chased after Ahmaud Arbery with guns, shooting him to death. An update on that McDonald's E. coli outbreak. Taylor Farms, one of the restaurant suppliers, says they've recalled their yellow onions out of their Colorado facility. The outbreak found in McDonald's Quarter Pounders killed 1 person and sickened 49 others in 10 states, mostly in Colorado. Federal health officials say the culprit could be those slivered onions, so that's why the move was made today. But it's important to note, no confirmation yet if there is an E. coli present in Taylor Farms produce. A live look at Kansas City, Missouri right now. Severe storms expected to hit parts of the Midwest. Jessica's tracking that.
And it looks almost clear right there right now. However, as we head into the coming hours, it's interesting. Not only are they dealing with storms right around the corner, they're also dealing with some record-breaking conditions for our daytime highs in areas like Oklahoma City, stretching all the way down into Dallas, right back over into Kansas City. We're well above average for this time of year, sitting in the 80s, but that's not the only thing we're dealing with. We also have a lot of active storms that are going to start popping up throughout that region where it looks clear right now. These storms are going to bring in a punch when it comes to heavy rain, potential thunderstorm activity, and on top of that, we're going to continue to track to see if there's any hail associated as it moves more north. But as of now, it's so warm there, it's hard to think that that could happen. Here's what's going on right now. A marginal risk for severe weather, just in that dark green color. Around that, that's a chance for thunderstorm activity. So taking a look behind me, as we continue to track the severe weather outlook, we're going to continue to monitor that exactly right here over areas like Missouri, all the way over into Iowa, into the evening hours tonight. Tracking this storm, like I said, these clouds are going to pop up quick. This storm is a very sharp system stretching from Wichita, Kansas, all the way over into Chicago into the early morning hours tomorrow. More on that coming up in a bit. For now, back to you, Reed.
If you have a ticket to a Broadway show, you might notice something different about the iconic Playbill. In honor of Playbill's 140th anniversary, every show now has 4 different covers to feature different eras of the Great White Way, from the Golden Age to the groovy 1970s. A facility in Queens prints all of these Playbills, and they arrive at the theaters almost every day. Chances are you have one in a file somewhere from a Broadway show. They tell patrons who is who in the beautiful stage scenes that happen every day on Broadway.
Playbill is really a treasure box. It could be a souvenir, it could be a guide. The actors, it means a lot too, because that's their goal, is to be at a Playbill.
I do remember writing my first bio and thinking, oh my God, holy cow, it's going to be in a Playbill.
It's going to be in a Playbill. Fun fact about that yellow banner at the top. Turns out yellow was the cheapest ink color at the time. So that's why the Playbill, it has a background that is that iconic yellow. I have two from recent plays, Harry Potter on Broadway and Moulin Rouge. Highly recommended. Fantastic shows. Go support The Great White Way and so many actors who work so hard and are so brilliant. And also the behind-the-scenes people who really do the work. That's it for us at CBS News 24/7. We thank you so much for watching day in and day out. Our coverage from the campaign trail continues, drilling down on those issues that matter to you in your communities. That's our deepest held value at CBS News, telling your stories at the neighborhood level. Have a great afternoon.